This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
Hello once again. We're back with A Different Perspective, as you well know. For those of you waiting to hear Brad Steiger, and we had planned to do a Halloween spooktacular, which is a term that we both absolutely hated and were making fun of. Brad came down with the flu and is unavailable to us. Fortunately, I was able to prevail on Ray Stanford to come on the program today rather than when we had him scheduled in a couple of weeks. Ray Stanford, for those of you who do not know, is the man who is credited writing literally the book on the Socorro UFO landing, which is a Socorro Saucer in a Pentagon Pantry. And he describes his investigation into that landing case and his interactions with the various participants, such as Lonnie Zamora, the police officers from Socorro, Alan Hynek, who was the Air Force consultant, and some of the Air Force personnel and military personnel who were investigated that as well. He also is a pioneer in using optical and electric instruments to successfully obtain propulsion-diagnostic evidence of what he now terms anomalous aerial objects, which we laymen call UFOs. And in the mid-1970s and the 1980s, he was able to document in the field multi-witness UFO sightings and obtained high-resolution images during some of his investigations. What I find absolutely fascinating here, he is the only person in UFO studies and research who has discovered and documented a new species of dinosaur. I will attempt to pronounce it, and I'm sure he'll correct me if I get it wrong. It is a Propanoploaurus marylandicus, and it's on display in the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. He found the dinosaur inside the Washington, D.C. Beltway, and apparently the astronomers at the Goddard Space Flight Center, or whatever the name of that place there in Washington is, had been walking over it for years. So that is kind of an interesting thing, and is the only armored dinosaur hatchling reported in the United States, or in the eastern part of the United States. He has provided a number of links to scientific papers to give you more information about this, and unfortunately they're very long and very complicated, which do not work well on the radio. But I'll put them up at my blog, www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, as soon as we have the link to the program up. So those of you who are interested in following up on that research can do that. So I would like to take this time to welcome Ray Stanford to the program. Welcome, Ray Stanford, to the program.
Well, hi, Kevin. It's nice to be here.
That's all you have to say after all that?
That's all I have to say.
And the pronunciation of your dinosaur, did I get that even close?
Not quite. It's Propanoploaurus marylandicus.
Okay. Well, there you go. My Latin is lousy. What can I tell you about it? As I mentioned earlier, you were the you may be the only living investigator who was originally at the site of the Socorro UFO landing back in April of 1964. And when I had Ben Moss and Tony Angiola on the program a few weeks ago, we had talked a lot about the landing, of course, at length. And he mentioned a photograph that you had taken of a Socorro-like object several months later. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Okay, that should be taken with great deal of caution. What it was, simply, after the events described in my Socorro book involving the zinc iron alloy scraped onto a rock in the Northwest Landing Gear imprint, after the events happened at Goddard Space Flight Center involving that described there, we went out, Bob McGarry and I drove on out, going back to Phoenix, our homes. We drove by Socorro, and on the 26th of August, I had an appointment to see Lonnie Zamora at 2 o'clock when he got off duty. And so we simply decided the best thing to do to spend the time before Lonnie was off duty was to go to the site and try to make some measurements of magnetic deviation. We didn't have a good instrument at that time, so we just used a compass, and using it a given distance from each plate of the steel dynamite shack, we recorded how many degrees and what direction it veered the compass, which probably has no scientific utility, but we did it anyway. And
Ray, I have to interrupt you because we're going to have to take a break here. I know this first segment is very short, and I spend a lot of the time talking about it. But we will be back with Ray Stanford right after this, talking about the photographs that he took and a little bit more about the Socorro casing. We will return after these brief messages. This is Kevin Randle. For nearly 30 years, I have been investigating the case of the Roswell UFO. I have interviewed hundreds of people and stood on the crash site. Now in Roswell in the 21st century, I have reviewed dozens of hours of audio and videotaped interviews, examined hundreds of files that relate to the crash, and have returned to Roswell in an attempt to put all that information into the proper perspective. For the first time in Roswell in the 21st century, I have made a dispassionate reevaluation of all that material and provide a new look at what happened. This is a book that clears away all the clutter that has hidden the truth for so long, strips away the various lies that surround the case, exposes the Air Force attempts at cover-up, and found a core of solid information that tells us all where the case stands today. Roswell in the 21st century will be available in just a few weeks. For more information, please visit my website at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com.
Gibbs A. Williams, Ph.D., is a practicing psychoanalyst, supervisor, researcher, and author in New York City. Much of his life has been dedicated to understanding nature and the uses of meaningful coincidences or synchronicities. His radical and original non-Jungian, non-mystical, non-magical theory of synchronicities illuminates much of the fog surrounding this challenging and perplexing topic. His ideas and manners are fresh, presented in a style that is both entertaining and highly informative. He is also an expert on crisis intervention, specially focused on violence reduction for the police and citizens, mastering anxiety, frustration, and stress without the use of medication, and effectively preventing and treating heroin addiction. Dr. Williams can be contacted at his email address at gwwilliamsny11@aol.com or visit his website at www.drgibbswilliams.com.
Shamanism is recognized as a method to access the quantum level. Mastery of shamanic skills puts spiritual information and healing power into your hands. Path Home Shamanic Art School, a bonded Colorado certified occupational school, has met rigorous state standards, ensuring its director and instructors have the qualifications to teach the shamanic arts. Path Home offers its certification program in blocks of study. Block 1, a 5-day intensive, will be held in the beautiful mountain town of Coaldale, Colorado, October 13th through 18th. Registration deadline is September 12th. Experience journey trance, power animals, helping spirits, sacred space, and life purpose. Come discover your power. Join me, Gwilda Wiyaka, in the magical world of shamanism. Call 303-775-3431 or visit findyourpathhome.com.
And we are back with my guest, Ray Stanford. Ray Stanford. There's a Stanford's in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and that confuses me for a moment. Ray Stanford, who is the man that literally wrote the book on the Socorro UFO landing. And when we went away, we were talking about a photograph that he had taken near the dynamite shack that Lonnie Zamora had been heading toward when he saw the landed craft. And you were saying that you had been taking measurements, magnetic measurements in the area at the time, doing some work in preparation for meeting Lonnie Zamora. So when I interrupted you, you were taking your measurements. So let's go from there.
Okay, I noticed on the front of the dynamite shack's metal door, there was the ownership of it and where they were from. So I took a picture of the dynamite shack, hopefully showing that door for size reference. My friend was with me, standing beside it. And this is the picture that Tony might have been talking to you about. I really wish people wouldn't talk about it until we have something more definite. The thing was that years later here, I heard a report on the internet, someone asking for who owned the dynamite shack, and I pulled an 8x10 photograph out of my old Socorro file to try to see if I could read the writing that was done in metal on the door telling who owned it. And when I did, I was kind of astonished to see that back on the western horizon, there was something that if it was real in the sky, certainly neither Bob McGarry nor I, who were there, saw anything. Of course, we weren't looking. We were just there to measure the dynamite shack and get on to meet Lonnie Zamora at 2 o'clock. So anyway, in the picture, it shows several objects. On the far left, it shows a thing that looks like it could be the Socorro object with the ends not pointed right toward you, but off to one side, and with no landing gear. But on near the far right side, there's something that looks spookily like a photograph of the object with its landing gear out, very much like drawn in my Socorro book, landed, but here in the air, and you see what looks like a landing gear and the object. And then off in the distance, there's 3 objects that could far away look like they could be discs. And in between the things I've just described, there's way back there something looks like someone with imagination might say was a mothership back there. But I am dubious of photographs in which people don't see anything because the other day I had experience of thinking something odd was in one of my photographs there at Socorro, another one of them. And when I got back to the first generation print, I found out that all the prints on the roll of film, all the prints made from roll of film, had the same things in the sky. It was crud on the glass template that the negative was against when they printed it. So I want to say that even though this may look to people like I got a photograph of a Socorro object, for now I simply can't believe it. I look at it and I'd love to believe it, but I have to be objective. So I've got all these files with a lot more important things since the Socorro event, so I hadn't paid attention to these files in years, but somewhere in the files I've got the original negative and the original first generation photograph, and I can compare the negative to the print of the photograph and the ones adjacent to it on the film and see if these are really optical images. But even if they are, it still, in my opinion, would have to be downrated quite a bit because it was nothing seen. We don't know what's out there, and we know the human tendency. I'll give you an example. I'm a dinosaur track researcher, and you'd be surprised at things that people bring me on rocks that they think are dinosaur tracks. Just because something has a superficial resemblance to something doesn't mean it is, but our human mind, it to be something, will turn it into it. So I say I'm going to hold off on saying that I've got anything important photographically there at the Socorro site because I need to get to the original negative and see if it's a real optical image. If it is, I'll take it more seriously, but even then the case would have the problem that we didn't notice anything. But again, everything in the picture is within 1/2 degree of the western horizon. And when you're out and thinking UFOs, and we weren't really thinking that they would come over that day, you're probably not looking within 1/2 degree of the horizon. You're looking up higher in the sky. But anyway, we didn't see anything, so that's the story. There are a lot more interesting aspects to the Socorro case and evidences that have not yet been brought forth that may hold a lot more importance.
But what you're saying is Tony and Ben may have been a little bit more enthusiastic about the photograph than you are.
Yes, they haven't been on this so many years to see how you have to be extremely cautious, and I'd say that's that they see it and wow, this looks like Ray has photographed the object. But at this point I wouldn't say so at all.
Oh, so we kind of cleared up the picture problem then. I noticed when talking to both Ben and Tony on the radio a couple of weeks ago that they were very excited about the case, and they seemed to be very level-headed and very cautious about many, many things. But this happens to be one of the things they may have been a little bit more enthusiastic for than you would like them to have been.
Right. I mean, after all, I took the picture, and well, we'll see. Within the next few weeks, if I get time away from my work related to dinosaurs and mammal tracks, I'll try to get back to it, and we'll solve the mystery of whether the photograph at least shows optical images or whether it's an artifact of some sort.
Okay, that's good. Talking to them also, they had kind of made the case that Lonnie Zamora never said he'd seen beings or creatures or aliens or things, but he talked about just seeing white coveralls down there by the craft. And I noticed in your book that it seems that Lonnie had been somewhat more specific in what he had seen. That
Absolutely.
there was, and I hesitate to use the term alien creatures, but there were humanoids down there,
Yes.
things with heads and hands and feet and that sort of thing. Is that correct?
Right. Let me say that if they're saying that, I'm going to have to get on to them, because that is not the case at all. In fact, Lonnie Zamora kind of laughed at the fact that he, that Hynek was saying at his news conference on the 29th of April that he had said, well, he only described something, like some kind of white coverall, maybe like it would be hanging on a line or something. No, let me explain that. Ironically, just before that media conference in which Hynek was interviewed by Walter Schroed of Radio KSRC Socorro, I had been at the site with Lonnie Zamora, Sergeant Sam Chavez, and Hynek. And Hynek stood right there, and we talked about what Lonnie saw. And he described them not as coveralls. He described them as small figures. And I said, Lonnie, do you have any idea what size these figures were? Now, he was objective. He didn't say people, he said figures. But he was clear that these were animate things, not just coveralls. He said they looked like they were wearing white coveralls. Okay, I asked him if he had any idea of size, and he said yes. He said, now the one that turned, he said one of them turned his head around and looked like he had probably heard the car coming up the hill in the gravel or something, and turned around and looked as he topped the hill. And he said this figure looked startled. Well, coveralls don't look startled.
Yeah, I wondered about that because I'd seen that in a lot of descriptions where they reacted to the presence of Lonnie Zamora there, and I wondered how do white coveralls react?
Yeah, it's a good question. Now, as we talked, and I said, well, he put his hand up beside a certain branch that was sticking out of the creosote bush that was just on the north side of the northwest landing gear, and he said the head came right about to here. And I said, well, that's really pretty small. How would you characterize them in human terms? He said, well, it was about the size of a 10-year-old kid, and then that's not very big. So he was definitely not describing just coveralls. He said they were wearing what looked like white coveralls, but Hynek absolutely heard him describe them as figures, and that jumped, and that were wearing what looked like white coveralls, and then his head jerking and turning, and he described exactly. He put his hand right there on the bush where he saw his head. And Zamora was a good, talented observer and had good memory about observations. I could go into reason how we know this. But anyway, ironically, when we got to the media conference, within 20 minutes after this conversation in which Hynek stood right there and heard all of this, he said that Zamora had never described anything to him about seeing any figures, that he described something that might have resembled white coveralls. right there with me in the room, who had stood right there with him, and Lonnie Zamora describing this.
Well, in fairness to Ben and Tony, I may have misunderstood what they were saying, but it was my impression they were saying that Lonnie had never talked about anything other than the white coveralls. And I also noticed in going back through the Project Blue Book file on this, that Hynek's report, his first report in the Blue Book files, mentions nothing, absolutely nothing, about seeing any creatures or any figures or anything like that at all. He skipped over that completely.
Yes. He skipped over a lot of things. For example, in his report, when we came back up out of the ravine in preparation to going to the media conference, when we got up to the top, Alan Hynek asked Zamora to go through exactly what happened when he pulled up there. Now, the police car that was there belonged to the state police, Sergeant Sam Chavez's car of the state police, and Zamora pointed out that Hynek had asked him to put the car exactly where he had pulled his. Now, contrary to anything you will see in the Air Force reports, any of them, the car was 50 feet from the center of the landing quadrangle. And Zamora talked about how he knocked his microphone out, picked it up, and stepped out of the car, and he took 3 steps toward the device that was sitting in the ravine. Now, keep in mind that he had his glasses on, and this object was in the vicinity, let's say 18 to maybe around 18 feet long. And he's only, when he got 3 steps, he was taking big steps, he said, he was really, he was in a state of wonderment, but he could plainly see the red so-called insignia, or whatever you want to call it, on the side. He could see that they were landing here. And all of a sudden, there was a terrible roar that at first he thought was an explosion. In response to this, having been trained in the military, he flew to the ground, turned his head in the opposite direction of the object, and he showed us exactly where he hit the ground. And in my Socorro book, we have a very accurate, detailed drawing of exactly how he showed us he was on the ground. Now, Hynek does not mention that. His feet were 35 feet from the center of the object as it's projected onto the ground beneath it, where the so-called exhaust and takeoff, so-called flame would have been. That close. And it's not mentioned at all in the report. So the report, Hynek was an extremely absent-minded person. But if that's all due to absent-mindedness, I'm surprised, because these are very important features when you talk about figures that reacted and short figures. I think that Hynek was probably fully conscious of the fact that it had been recommended to Lonnie Zamora by FBI agent Arthur Burns.
Well, wait. Let's clarify that. You say recommended to him, and I think it was Captain Holder who recommended him not describe the symbol.
Yeah, right.
But the point is, it was recommended as opposed to ordered. He was not.
That's correct. That's correct.
So I think it's an important distinction.
No, let's not switch the subject, Kevin. We're talking about not the symbol. We're talking about what he was told by FBI agent Arthur Burns about recommended, about the actual occupants and their size. See, now that's the thing. He didn't tell him, you can't describe these little characters. He said, in effect, he said, well, Lonnie, if you talk about seeing these little figures beside this thing, people are going to laugh at you and make fun of you, which they did. He was right. But I don't believe, quite frankly, that Lonnie's welfare was really what was at heart in making that comment. After all, this particular thing that he saw, small figures, takes it out of the realm of a black project craft, because black project craft are made to be operated by normal-sized people, and you don't build them to be tested by midgets.
Well, we're going to have to take a short break here. Wasn't trying to change the subject, wanted to clarify that one point about the recommendations to it. We will be back with Ray Stanford, author of Socorro Saucer and the Pentagon Pantry, and talking about the Socorro landing and some other things right after this.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone radio show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, High Tech with Corey Kay, and every minute of the 24/7, 365 programming of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 712-432-9459, courtesy of TalkStream Live. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 712-432-9459 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 712-432-9459 for the best of paranormal, new age, thought-provoking, sci-fi radio programming 24/7, 365.
Wouldn't you love to know the secret to everything? Well then, meet Dr. Kimberly McGeorge and her cutting-edge, breakthrough knowledge that combines science with possibility. Dr. Kimberly brings real-life answers and healing to those open to alternative solutions. She teaches solution-based programs and classes that will change all areas of your life forever. Specializing in conscious creation, intuitive readings, and energy medicine, you can rapidly shift health, relationships, business, and money and abundance challenges quickly. Receive her best-selling book, Secret to Everything, at no cost by going to secrettoeverything.com/X-Zone. That's right, transformation can start now. Just go to secrettoeverything.com/X-Zone and receive Dr. Kimberly's book for free.
While science pursues fact, magic accesses the quantum level, bridging random facts to form truth. As long as science and magic remain separate and polarized, the truth cannot be known. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka. Join me on the Science of Magic radio program, dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. During each episode, I'll be speaking with experienced and respected scientists and mystics. From astrologers to astronomers, from medical doctors to shaman, the scientific method to dowsing and intuition, we'll weave together information from seemingly divergent practices to promote unity and enlightenment. Join me, Gwilda Wiyaka, and the Science of Magic right here on the Mutual Broadcast Network. For more information, visit www.thescienceofmagic.net.
I am Dr. Carl O'Helvey, founder, president of a new cancer foundation focusing on evidence-based physical, mental, and spiritual interventions, including natural cancer cures, prayer, meditation, affirmations, nutrition, and other related holistic cancer prevention and cure modalities. These are used in cancer education, research, and financing care. I ask for your help to continue this important work by donating at www.holisticcancerfoundation.com.
And we are back with Ray Stanford talking about Socorro in detail here. Ray having been or is the only living investigator who was on the site right after Zamora's sighting in the days that followed it, talking about his measurements, what he saw, what Lonnie Zamora and Sam Chavez, who was a state police sergeant at the time, the first person that Lonnie Zamora talked to about this. And we were talking about FBI agent Burns, who, by the way, I noticed in the reports in the Project Blue Book file, got a little ahead of myself there. The reports in the Project Blue Book file that Burns had asked Holder not to mention that the FBI was there. And I've seen that in other cases where the FBI has said, we're not really here, we're doing something else. So anyhow, these guys were making recommendations, really not ordering Lonnie Zamora to do something, but suggesting ways of handling this, and had suggested that he not mention the small beings, the small things that he had seen, simply because it would lead to ridicule. And I think what you were saying at the time when we took our break there was that is exactly what happened. There were people who were less than kind to Lonnie Zamora about seeing these, and I'll just call them alien creatures for the lack of a better term right now, these alien creatures.
Okay.
So Lonnie had seen the creatures. He was told not to talk about it. We're now at the press conference with Hynek in the room. I think it's his hotel room from what you said in your book.
Right.
You're in there. The reporter's in there. Hynek mentions absolutely nothing about the alien creatures.
That's right. He merely was willing to talk about that. Zamora had said he saw something resembling white coveralls, two of them standing beside the object in the ravine, and one of them reacting as if it were startled. That would be a good one for Halloween, wouldn't it?
So he's I really don't understand Hynek's response there, simply because there's other cases in the Blue Book files where they talk about alien creatures, and he doesn't seem to be that flummoxed by them. But I like I said, in the report, I mean, it sort of confirms what you're saying there. In his report to the Air Force, he mentions nothing about that. He talks about other things, but he doesn't talk about the alien beings, the alien creatures. Did he give you descriptions of like facial features or anything like that? Footwear?
He said he could not see facial features, but he could see the head and see the upper part of the body and the head kind of look around and jerk, like it was startled. He just said he couldn't see any facial features, and he couldn't tell whether it had any headgear on or not, but he could see the heads. But keep in mind that this was just as he topped the rise after 3 attempts to get up at hitting the gas so hard that he was spinning in the gravel and not making progress until the third time got to the top. And this was literally, this observation, I don't believe, lasted more than a very few seconds, because he was anxious to get over there to it, and the dirt tracks dropped down to the right and the north before you could go over further west, and so he lost sight of it. So it was a very brief observation.
And it was through the windshield of the car. He's in the car.
He saw it through the open window of the car.
Open window, okay.
Yeah, because he was turning the car right to go north where the tracks went, and that window was open. His windows had been open. That's one of the things that enabled him to hear the roar of that flame he saw in the sky that was coming down that caused him to go in that direction. The windows of his car were, in fact, down.
And that was one of the other things. We've always looked at this as sort of a single witness case. It's Lonnie Zamora seeing this thing, and that's it. And as I was going through the Blue Book files, and I noticed the same thing in your book, Richard Holder reported that the police officers, the dispatcher in the Socorro police station, had mentioned that they had gotten 3 telephone calls about a blue flame in the sky. And I mentioned this because Ben Moss and Tony Angiola had mentioned these things, and I had asked him at the time, did you check the police logs? And I never really got an answer from them on that, and we kind of moved on from that. But going through that, we find Holder's report talking about that. So even though it clearly was not mentioned in the logs, the police officers there told Holder and others that 3 people had called in. So it's sort of not a single witness case, simply because we have that report. Unfortunately, we don't know who those people are. Nobody bothered to take names or phone numbers or write it down.
Oh, let me mention, though, that let me add a visual witness. Sergeant Sam Chavez of the New Mexico State Police, the late Sam Chavez. All the policemen in Socorro that knew him knew that when Lonnie called, and Lonnie asked him to come alone, even though others heard it and followed. The first one was New Mexico State Policeman Ted V. Jordan, along with Under Sheriff James Luckey. But Chavez was the first to arrive, and while he was approaching the site, not yet at the site, he observed the object in the sky. He did not want this known. He thought, probably the rest of his life, that this was some kind of a black project craft. He couldn't believe that there were any little creatures beside it that maybe he knew Zamora could be trusted, but he thought, maybe he had misobserved their size. But he saw this, but it wasn't close up. He saw it way up in the sky where it was kind of an unknown view, circular, as you can imagine, the way it flew away to the west, and Chavez is approaching from the east, basically, and it's going on up in the sky. It was way up there, of small angular size, but he definitely did see it, and it was moving at a substantial clip when he saw it, according to what he told the policeman friends of his. Now, there's a visual witness, and then Walter Schroed and I went into a restaurant bar there in Socorro on the night of the Tuesday, I guess the 29th of April, 1964, and we were sitting in there, and of course everybody in town knew who Walter Schroed was at the radio station. So, two women there saw him and started talking about the case, and they said that while they didn't see it, they clearly heard it. And what they described, I mean, there's no question if you'd heard them that they were utterly sincere. If they were hoaxed in the first place, they'd have said they saw it. But both of them were taking care of their normal duties, whatever they do in their homes. They live in two different places. And each of them heard a terrible roar, and then it stopped. But then, a minute or so later, however long it was, they heard another roar. Well, their natural presumption was that maybe something had been launched from White Sands, and they were hearing a lot of noise from some kind of a launch or something related to White Sands, so they didn't look out. But they both said they heard it, and that the timing and the spacing between the first roar and the second roar were commensurate with Lonnie Zamora's description of the timing of the event. So there we had two auditory witnesses right there. Let me also say that I found the testimony, and I have an affidavit in my book, from Opal Grinder. And not only that, I talked to his son, who also witnessed it. Let me mention that, as some of the books say, there was a witness in the car that stopped there. There were four witnesses. I'm sorry, there were five.
Apparently, a husband, a wife, and three sons.
Three sons, and there were three sons. And these people, let me point out two things that most people haven't realized. They not only saw Zamora head over in that direction, they saw Chavez's car with lights flashing. Zamora's was not light flashing. He was just following the speeder. He wasn't chasing him. But Chavez was in a hurry because of the call to Zamora. Zamora thought maybe there had been a car overturned in the ravine. So he didn't wait till after he got to the site and the thing took off. No, he radioed Chavez when he thought that this might have been some kind of a white car or something down the ravine that turned over, and that the little figures might have been some kids that, maybe their parents are caught inside or something. So Chavez is rushing out there with his lights flashing, and the witnesses saw that. They were actually quite a bit further south than most people realize when this happened, because they said that they were right alongside what they described as a trash dump, something to that effect. So anyway, Grinder and his son sounded very credible, and it was right at the end of the day, and his wife was rushing out to the bank for the day's deposit. But they were fascinated by what they heard, but they didn't realize what was being described because Zamora's case had not become public knowledge.
Well, and the problem here is we don't know who the people were in the car. No. We have it secondhand from Opal Grinder, and I have no reason to doubt that he was telling the truth as he knew it, but we don't know who those people were. And it's interesting that with all the publicity of the sighting, especially in April of 1964, I mean, this was in the newspapers around the country. I think it was even broadcast on the network news broadcast, that those people never came forward to mention that they had seen this thing flying over the highway.
I don't think that's puzzling at all. People are, because of the ridicule factor, people are extremely, keep in mind that if they come out after the report is out and say this, then they're backing up a story that from the policeman's standpoint, from Lonnie's standpoint, is a lot more incredible. Occupants were seen and so forth. And they've got three young boys. You think about, well, at school, what are they going to say? Hey, man, you seen little green men? They say the same thing they said to Lonnie. The kids in that town persecuted poor Lonnie. He got off the police force. He didn't like being there in the blue uniform and having them drive by and say, hey, seen any little green men lately? So he took a job managing a service station on the south side of town for a while until he took another job just to get out of the scene. And I can understand parents with three young kids that might like to talk about this, but don't want to drag the media feeding frenzy in on it.
Well, that's a good point, but now we're 52 years later, and we still don't have a clue as to who those people are. So, unfortunately, I mean, it's an interesting story, but it does little to underscore or to support what. Yeah, I think of the same thing. Did Sergeant Chavez ever produce a written document about what he'd seen?
Oh, no.
Even though
he would not dare have done so. This would draw attention to the case. He didn't want people investigating it. He truly, really thought that this was a black project craft. He just really could entertain any idea that UFOs might be something exotic coming from somewhere else. He was that kind of a very practical, call him a level-headed man, but he was skeptical. And he only confided it to his fellows in blue, and that was it. And they confided it to me, but I honored him. I know he would not want it out, and I'm one who, if somebody talks in privacy, I believe in keeping it that way unless they say you have permission. And I knew that Chavez would not possibly have granted permission, the fact that he saw it. Furthermore, he only saw a round object going away at high speed in the sky, which is commensurate with Zamora's final description of the observation, but that doesn't confirm the amazing things that Lonnie reported on the ground.
No, but it helps underscore what he had seen,
sure
because
does.
here's somebody else that saw something in the sky, and I understand Chavez not wanting to get dragged into this, especially when you read about some of the things that Lonnie Zamora had gone through. I get that as well. I'm merely saying that if you look at this as the devil's advocate, we have a report that Chavez may have seen the thing, but there's no way to really confirm it. We have the witnesses that Opal Grinder saw, talked to, but we have no names for that. The two ladies who heard the thing, again, we're in the same boat with that. We don't know who they are, so we can't get their perspective, even though it's 50 years later. So, I mean, those are kind of problems.
Scientifically, that kind of stuff doesn't matter, at least in the context of ameliorating the viewpoint of the scientific establishment about this. You've got to have hard evidence. May I talk for a minute about some possible hard evidence that we may have on this case?
Yes, let's do that right after this, because we've got to take another short break here, and we'll talk about that. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Project Starlight International. I think that may be where you're going with the hard evidence. So we will come back in just a few moments with Ray Stanford talking about UFOs and those sorts of things. And we will have on my blog, www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, a couple of links to the scientific papers that Ray has produced about his dinosaur discovery. We will be back in.
As host of Dialogue with Divinity, I am thrilled to join the X-Zone Broadcast Network and their growing number of affiliates. My quest for a connection to the divine ignited my successful career path as an international spiritual counselor for over 40 years, an author of 4 books, and well-known metaphysical educator. My clients call me their spiritual mama. So my job is to offer you a radio show to help you grow spiritually with wisdom and get specific tools from guests who are experts in their field. Tune in to Dialogue with Divinity and be part of the conversation with Spirit. My goal, your happy soul. For more information, please visit my website at johannacarroll.com.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone radio show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, High Tech with Corey Kay, and every minute of the 24/7, 365 programming of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 712-432-9459, courtesy of TalkStream Live. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 712-432-9459 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 712-432-9459 for the best of paranormal, new age, thought-provoking, sci-fi radio programming 24/7, 365.
Coming soon to the X-Zone Broadcast Network is A Different Perspective with me, Kevin Randle, as your host. We'll be taking a close look at what is happening in the world of UFOs today with side trips into the paranormal. Guests will range from those who are household names to those who have a different perspective on a variety of topics. No topic will be taboo, but there will be tough questions asked as we all search for the truth about UFOs, the paranormal, and those things that excite us. Sometimes we'll agree with a guest and sometimes we won't, but we'll try to keep the program topical. For those of you who would like to read, be sure to visit www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com and remember to listen to the other fine programs on the X-Zone Broadcast Network at www.xzbn.net. This is Kevin Randle. For nearly 30 years, I have been investigating the case of the Roswell UFO. I have interviewed hundreds of people and stood on the crash site. Now in Roswell in the 21st century, I have reviewed dozens of hours of audio and videotaped interviews, examined hundreds of files that relate to the crash, and have returned to Roswell in an attempt to put all that information into the proper perspective. For the first time in Roswell in the 21st century, I have made a dispassionate reevaluation of all that material and provide a new look at what happened. This is a book that clears away all the clutter that has hidden the truth for so long, strips away the various lies that surround the case, exposes the Air Force attempts at cover-up, and found a core of solid information that tells us all where the case stands today. Roswell in the 21st century will be available in just a few weeks. For more information, please visit my website at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com.
What Happened in Benghazi is revealed by Nicholas Genix, author of Obama, Islam, and Benghazi. He informs the American people that President Obama deceived them by advocating a strong foreign policy prior to the 2012 presidential election, and Hillary Clinton supported this deception. As the title infers, there is a connection between Obama, Islam, and Benghazi. Ample evidence informs Americans that Obama's early indoctrination in the Quran developed an affinity for Islam, why the Quran is the source of discontent in many countries, and why the Obama foreign policy deception led to poor military action and caused the loss of American lives in Benghazi. Genix provides 36 questions for the Select Committee on Benghazi to validate if Americans are justified to mistrust President Obama and Hillary Clinton. An overview of Obama, Islam, and Benghazi is presented on the website www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com. Afterlife expert Roberta Grimes was the first one to say that dying can be fun. Now her best-selling book, The Fun of Dying, is available in stores worldwide. So if you wonder whether death ends life, how it feels to die, or what heaven might be like, The Fun of Dying was written for you. And if you have always been afraid of death, or if you worry that your life has no meaning, let The Fun of Dying ease your fears and bring new meaning to your life. Nothing said in The Fun of Dying is based on the teachings of any religion. Instead, Roberta draws on evidence to explain how death happens, how it feels, and what comes next. A lot of the best death-related evidence was produced in the first half of the 20th century. When it is put together with recent discoveries, it tells a consistent and amazing story. Roberta Grimes blogs and answers questions at robertagrimes.com. Her wonderful book, The Fun of Dying, is available on Amazon and at stores worldwide wherever books are sold.
And we are back with Ray Stanford, talking much longer about the Socorro case than I had originally intended, but there's so much information about this case, and it's such an interesting case, it sort of demands that we spend some time on it. When we went away, Ray was going to talk to us about some physical evidence. I'm not sure if he was relating to the Socorro case and other things that he's done. He is one of the men behind Project Starlight International, which was an attempt to document through instrumentality and photographic means UFO sightings. So we'll try to get to that. But you mentioned some physical evidence, Ray. So I thought you could expand on that.
Well, I could talk about some possible physical evidence in the Socorro case.
Okay.
I'll try to make this brief. One of the occasions in which I revisited the landing site, the rocks were still around the area where the landing gear had been, and so you could determine, and the relics of the bush that had been partially disintegrated by the so-called exhaust flame. When we went there, I could tell where that was, and so what I did, I simply dug down about 3.5, 4 inches, maybe 4.5 inches from that spot, and found a typical volcanic rock of the type that you see a lot of around Socorro. It's what's called a non-eruptive, but it is of magmatic origin. And I found this rock. It's about 4.5 inches maximum dimension. But the reason I picked it up was because it places on its surface, it has a kind of an odd, almost translucent-looking greenish material, totally uncharacteristic of rocks of that type. And I subsequently had a Bureau of Land Management person collect from me around 85 pounds of control rocks of the same type for study and comparison. There's nothing like that on them. But this had this green material, and then when we got to looking at it under a binocular microscope, we noticed that it appears that certain of the larger crystals, the quartz crystals in it, may have been melted. And, of course, in the magmatic condition, it's not an eruptive. Underneath them in the volcanic chamber, as it's cooling, you get these crystals growing, and they freeze. So they should be crystal-shaped. But on the surfaces of this, it looks like, and that's a cautionary term because looks can be misleading, but it looks as though these crystals at places at least, and maybe at most of the places, have melted and beat it up. When you melt a crystal, it will have a surface tension, and it will beat up if it's melted enough. And it looks kind of that way. Well, let me go back to when Heineke and I were at the site on Tuesday, the 29th of 1964, right in the area where the landing exhaust had played and landing and takeoff, right beside the half-disintegrated creosote bush, there was a little piece of rock that was not the type of rock that's native at all to that site. It must have washed down from the mountains years ago. But it's about, let's see, I would say it's about 4.5 centimeters across. And when I picked it up, I thought, well, I'll just take it for study in case it has any odd features to it, magnetic or otherwise. And I noticed a black spot on it. In my notes that I made right at the landing site, I said, I wonder if something from the burned bush or something else that the exhaust burned left a charcoal on the surface. This, what it turns out, it wasn't charcoal at all. It's part of the rock, an area in the ancient history of the rock. Somewhere it had gone under stress, and you had chalcedony, commonly called agate, that had grown in a curved fissure there, had filled it up, and right in the center of it, there's some microcrystals that can be seen. Normally, the chalcedony is cryptocrystal.
We need to talk about the metal fragments that you found because we're getting short on time here.
Well, this may be more important. The thing is that this appears, and other crystals in it do appear to be melted, and I'm preparing to have tests done, and if in fact they were melted, when we put a light stream through them, they will be what is called isotropic. If they're still crystal, they will refract light in two directions. It's called birefringent. If they are isotropic, then Socorro case is a whole new ballgame because it will suggest that whatever was driving that exhaust that did not bounce off the surface could not have been even a plasma engine. It must have been subatomic particles traveling at the speed of light, thus with great mass, producing thrust. If so, it takes a magnetic pulse driver, and it would suggest that some of the crystals oscillated and heated up. If that's the case, this is better evidence than anything that's been associated with the Socorro case. Now, as to the metal itself, Zamora said, as we were about to leave, oh gosh, I never noticed this before. He pointed out a place on the rock adjacent to where the landing gear had come down, the northwest landing gear event, that he said looked like it'd been broken or scraped by the landing gear. And ironically, Hynek just said, yes, I guess a heavy object could do that. He didn't ask himself, wait a minute, could there be anything scraped on this? But I did. So we rushed off to the press conference, and when he left and was carted off to Albuquerque by the Major Connor of U.S. Air Force Public Information Office in Albuquerque, I went back to the site. And I had photographed that location with a rock in it at 8:20-something that morning, and before I'd ever gone back out with Chavez and Zamora and Hynek. And so I had a picture of it before, and then I took a picture of it after I removed it from the site. And you can see the hole where I removed it. And much to my amazement, there were, where the rock had been scraped by the landing gear, there were little flecks of metal, and there was one with a little rolled up sliver. And now ultimately, when I got back to Phoenix, there was a medical doctor friend of mine that was wanting to see this, and I handed it to him, and he got a hold of it where the sliver was, knocked it off in the grass, and despite using a big magnet, we couldn't find it. But anyway, the rest of them were still there. And at the suggestion of Richard Hall of the NICAP, we took this to the Goddard Space Flight Center, and in the space materials section there, it was analyzed, and they promised to take only half the metal, and that we could go to lunch, and they'd come back, and we'd get it back with half the metal on it, and they would keep the rest of it to subject to radiation over the weekend, and then use X-ray diffraction tests to determine what it was. Well, when we got back, I almost lost my teeth. Had I been able to, I probably would, because if I had false teeth, because my jaw dropped. They had taken all the metal off the rock, and that left me very upset. And Hall said, "Oh, don't make a scene, don't make a scene." Well, I felt like making a scene, but didn't. And but anyway, Dr. Henry Frankel was the man in charge there, and he true to his word. He had me call him on Wednesday, the following. Or was it Tuesday? I'd have to check the book. And he said, "Ray, you'll find this interesting. That was on the alloy of zinc and iron that, according to our charts of all alloys produced, or charts of all alloys produced on the Earth, and we have very complete charts, there's no such alloy produced." And he said, so, it could lend itself to the interpretation. Wouldn't prove it, but it does lend itself to the interpretation that this might have had an extraterrestrial origin. He actually said that. He said, there's just a few little traces there that we don't know what they were, but we're going to do some tests, some further tests, and we'll let you know. But subsequently, to make a long story short, there was a cover-up. They came back and claimed, it was all a big mistake. Now Frankel didn't tell me this. I don't think he wanted to. I think he had to get a flunky to do that, somebody under him, I'll say. And another person named in the book called me and said, it was all a mistake. Well, I immediately called the head of the Department of Chemistry at Elmore College in Corpus Christi, where I was after I'd come back from Goddard, and where my parents lived, and he said such a mistake could not be made. And that pretty well settled to me that I hadn't been told the truth. But Dr. Hynek asked several major people in analysis whether that mistake was possible. They told him no, and he said, Ray, you know what? If I were you, now this was after he was free of the Air Force after 1969, but he said, if I were you, I would just accept the original statement. And by the way, Hynek went and liked my book, and he went over to the Manned Space Flight Center back in the days when John Schuessler was there, and I learned this from John. He actually donated a copy of my Socorro book to the technical library of the Manned Space Flight Center outside Houston.
So they have a copy of the book in case they want additional information.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they do if it's still there.
And that kind of brings up a question. We've mentioned the book several times, Socorro Saucer in the Pentagon Pantry. If someone wants to get a hold of the book, how do they do that?
Okay, if they want to buy the book, I have, thanks to the publisher who's deceased, but he left me several boxes of brand new. They were printed in 1976, but they're brand new condition. The hardcover with the dust jacket, brand new looking, and the original first edition. And if somebody wants that signed by me, what they can do, they can go to PayPal and pay me. It's $50 plus $10 for shipping, and $60 total, and pay it to Ray Stanford. PayPal. I'm listed as either Dinosaur Tracker at Verizon.net or RayStanford38 at gmail.com. I don't know which. They could try either and see which one works. But I can provide you with that later. You could put it up on your blog if you like. But they can do that, and I'll get it to them right away. Once I get the payment from PayPal, I will send it to them by priority mail with tracking. I'll even send them an email telling them the tracking number in case they want to keep track of it. So they can do that. The book is selling elsewhere. Believe it or not, I'm shocked, but it has sold. Some copies of it have sold for over $400, old beat-up copies. And but this is personally signed by me, and it's the brand new first edition from 1976.
Well, Ray, I'd like to thank you for taking your time to be with us today. I think we also thank Ben and Tony of MUFON VA, that's Virginia, for kind of getting us together to talk about these sort of things.
I appreciate that. They're good guys, by the way.
Sparking my interest in the Socorro case, and so they've done a lot of good work. I certainly appreciate you taking your time with us today. And as we said, we'll be up in a couple of days with the information on my blog at kevinrandle.blogspot.com so that you'll have an idea of how to get a hold of some of these papers that Ray has done, or how to get a hold of his book if you want a copy of that. We will be back next week with a new interview. I'm hoping that we'll have a member who was a man who was a member of the Project Blue Book staff to talk to us about what went on there. So that's all we have for today. Thank you for listening, and we will be back in 167 hours.